We were standing right here, and the lights just emerged over the tree. I mean, so it can't be real high. It had a semicircular front of white lights, and there were white lights about halfway down the sides. Then red lights on and across the back. The back was sort of squared up, and a little red flashing light right in the center.
I fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. Welcome to Lurk, bringing you creepy, strange, and bone-chilling stories, with your host, Jamie Jackson.
Hey lurkers, welcome to this week's episode. This week we are looking into the Wytheville UFO Incident that was the inspiration behind the start of the Wytheville UFO Festival. We're gonna just jump right in. The town of Wytheville was created by the donation of 100 acres in 1790. The town that would later be known as Wytheville was established as the county seat of Wythe County. The name came in honor of George Wythe, a well-respected Virginia lawyer, professor, and signer of the Declaration of Independence, who was also Thomas Jefferson's mentor. Interesting is that he never actually visited the area. The town took the name of Wytheville after a disastrous fire left a path of destruction in 1839. The community's history includes the town being an early favored location for visitors who wished to escape the heat of the deeper south for the cool mountain air and beautiful vistas. The main street once thrived with numerous hotels and boarding houses, as well as opera houses, theaters, and other entertainment venues. The building of Interstates 81 and 77 in the 1960s and 70s further secured Wytheville's history as a crossroads with these two major north-south arteries intersecting. It's known today as the crossroads of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The town has not been immune to tragedy. Two notable fires, one in 1839 and one in 1924, destroyed large portions of the downtown. In the summer of 1950, the community gained unwelcome national recognition as having the highest per capita outbreak of polio. Wytheville was of strategic importance during the Civil War and during attacks in 1863 during Toland's raid and 1865, Stoneman's 1865 raid. The town is also the birthplace of Edith Bowling Wilson, wife of President Woodrow Wilson. As I mentioned in the last episode, I opted to camp in the area while attending the UFO Festival on June 8th, and I can say the area is beautiful. There are lots of hiking opportunities in the area, including the Appalachian Trail. If you have the chance, I would definitely recommend a visit. And while the town is large, once you leave the town limits, it's rural mountain farmland or national forest land. Our story that we're going to talk about begins October 7th in 1987, on a Wednesday. 4 sheriff's deputies and a police chief standing outside, looking up, saw a bright red and green light hovering silently in the sky. Now, I did see some references that said it was 3 sheriff's deputies, but whatever, there were sheriff's deputies and a police chief looking up who saw a red and green light hovering. The light darted to another location and hovered again. The men were all former military and insisted the object could not be a plane or helicopter. The men filed a report but would never talk about it again. That same night, October 7th, 1987, not too far away, local high school students were gathered for a pep rally around a bonfire. one of the students, Lori Williamson, recalled something that she saw there that night.
We were just standing there talking, and all of a sudden I just looked up and I noticed a couple of other people looking up. It wasn't like a plane, it was more triangular shape, but it was really big and you could see everything. And there was no noise. I don't know what it was, but it didn't look like a plane.
The next morning, October 8th, Dan Gordon, the local radio news director at WYVE, was looking through logs to see what had happened the night before. He was looking for news to report. He came across the UFO reports, checked in with the sheriff, who told Dan Gordon about what his deputies had seen. Gordon reported on it on the air and sent it out on the wire services. He said, "It was a filler piece that came on at the end of the news, which I usually relegate to something that's maybe unusual, like we had one police officer who killed 5 chickens at once with 2 shots, and that was a story that ran as kind of a ha-ha piece, and this was another ha-ha piece, and being a very skeptical newsman, it was definitely not in my lead part of my news." Stations around the state began reporting on the UFO sightings also. 2 days later, another sighting was reported to the sheriff. A car had been run off the road by a circular round aircraft just north of Wytheville and Graham's Forge. The sheriff confirmed that it was credible people who were unfamiliar with the sightings from the previous day. Several more reports, including one from a state police dispatcher, came in. Dan Gordon and his friend, Roger Hall, decided to look into what was going on and see if they could witness the UFOs for themselves. They took a 35mm camera and a camcorder with them. For 2 hours, they traveled to areas where the sightings were reported. It was October 21st, and Roger and Dan were headed back home around 8:45 p.m. when they stopped in a driveway and saw an object moving across the sky. The craft was as big as a couple of football fields, about 600 to 900 feet. The measurement was based on seeing the object move over a couple of rancher-style houses. If the object had fallen out of the sky, it would have crushed those houses. The object made no sound. The UFO was flying under 1,000 feet and was less than 1,000 feet away from their location. They noticed a dome shape in the back and 3 picture window-like lights on the back. They had the cameras with them and ready to go, but didn't take a single photo. They later questioned why they hadn't taken any photos, but determined they were just too stunned by what they were seeing. The radio station was soon flooded with calls about sightings. There were reports of objects shaped like arrows and objects that barely moved and had a spotlight coming from them with no noise. One detailed a saucer with red, green, white, and blue lights going around its edge that disappeared behind a ridge. A local court reporter saw so many strange objects it became commonplace to see them. They would move over their house, then disappear over the mountain. Lights would emerge over the trees. It couldn't be too high because it was barely above the trees. It had red lights across the back, and the back was squared up. There was a little red flashing light in the center. The court reporter was only ever worried when they saw 4 of the objects at the same time one night. Another witness described a gigantic V-shaped object that was floating over their small backyard. It glided over their heads and headed towards the turn in the river. A man by the name of John Turner and his son saw a UFO with a row of red lights and a row of green lights shaped like the back of a car. It was flying as low as a tall tree. Paul Dellinger lived in Wytheville since 1966. He was a bureau reporter for the Roanoke Times during the extraterrestrial frenzy. Dellinger decided to run a short story on the Fort Chiswell sighting for the newspaper. That was the one the sheriff's deputies witnessed. He said, "I thought that would probably be the beginning and end of it. I didn't realize people were going to start looking up and seeing lights in the sky for weeks afterwards." Dellinger didn't go out looking for UFOs, and instead spent his time interviewing dozens of people about their unusual sightings of strange lights in the sky. While he was never able to explain their stories, it didn't take long for him to have his own narrative. He said, "Even I saw one, and I wasn't even looking that night, so there was definitely something in the air." Dellinger told WFXR News he was coming home late one night in 1988 when he saw a bright light at the end of his driveway. At first he thought the unidentified object was a street light until it started moving. A sight unlike anything he's ever seen. It very slowly passed over and I could see what looked like a rear window of some kind. 3 little things, sort of like teardrops, Dellinger said. The dark of night made it too difficult to distinguish the object's overall shape. Dellinger says the object did make a humming noise. After slowly gliding on his street, it eventually disappeared. The event was the only sighting Dellinger ever had. A dispatcher admitted to seeing objects described as a flying school bus, something bouncing on a string, a large sphere with red spheres on each side, and an upside-down ice cream cone, along with a humongous mothership. It slowly hovered or drifted just above the trees. The mayor was not panicked by what was going on. He said, "Nobody has been zapped, there's been no damage, and nobody has gotten hysterical." A local hotel owner reported people driving cars with NASA logos that came and stayed in town for 4 or 5 days. Remember Dan Gordon, the radio news director? He also saw UFOs after his initial sighting. He saw them again on 2 other nights along US 21, just a few miles south of Wytheville. It was slow-moving with a strobe light in front and windows. Most people believed that the crafts they were seeing in the sky were nothing more than some kind of military aircraft. But Dan Gordon called the nearest bases and was told that the aircraft were not theirs. Between 1987 and 1989, there were 3,000 sightings reported. Dan Gordon saw them 43 times himself, and one even paced his car at about 25 miles per hour. The residents were told that they were seeing military aircraft refueling. Dan Gordon called to confirm his information. He said, "I called the Pentagon and talked to the Air Force general there, who told me if they're refueling under 13,000 feet, then somebody's butt's in a sling. And to this day, we don't know if they were refueling at 5,000 feet. But at the same time, I have asked, if it is military, then I'll back off the story and leave it alone if you tell me, because I'm a patriot. And each time I'm told, it's not us, we're not doing it, and we haven't been doing it." Gordon's friend, Roger Hall, was a pilot and certain the object they saw was flying at less than 1,000 feet, and only 1,500 feet or so away from them, so definitely not in refueling range. One of the reports that came in was from a family visiting from out of state who saw a low-flying object that flew over their car and hovered above them for 5 to 10 minutes. It then flew off silently. It was oval with red and white lights that pulsated. Another report said 2 low-flying objects with red and white lights near I-77 appeared to stop and hover for long periods of time, and then speed off with no sound. A woman reported seeing a small object emerge from the bottom of a larger one, then appear to chase the bigger one. Dan Gordon, Roger Hall, and John Stembler, a photographer from New York, watched a craft with a strobe light flashing different colors in front, and as it passed, 3 illuminated square windows were seen in the back. Another sighting included what appeared to be a red ball that seemed to fly directly at the larger craft until both disappeared in a cloud. Another man saw the object in binoculars. He said he had the impression that it was 747 sized or larger. A woman and her husband driving pulled over when they saw an object in the sky. It looked like a long object with lights in the front, center, and back. Dan Gordon and Roger Hall went out again to search for UFOs. This time they did manage to take photographs. With the film still undeveloped, Dan called a press conference for the following day, October 23, 1987. Dan said, "The night before the press conference, I received a phone call from somebody who refused to identify himself, and he said that I needed to be aware that the CIA and the federal government were very much interested in the Wythe County UFOs. I started to wonder what I'd stepped into, and my wife was urging me to back off, to leave it alone, and I was receiving some anonymous phone calls saying, 'It's not for your place to be messing in defense matters.'" After the press conference, Dan discovered that his house had been broken into. Although nothing was stolen, Dan was convinced that someone was looking for his photographs. When developed, the photos revealed only vague streaks of light in the sky, but 6 weeks later, Dan had another opportunity to photograph the UFOs. He was out shopping with his wife and daughter when they encountered some unexpected visitors. "We looked very quickly and saw what I thought was one large object, which later appeared to be 4 flying disc shapes. As soon as the objects were photographed, they disappeared from view. When the pictures came out, they showed 4 definite shapes of objects in the sky, but the most impressive point in the 4 photographs, the objects appeared to change shape or life formations within 1 click of the camera. They go from a teardrop shape to a round ball shape, then they go to a flying saucer-like disc shape, and then they go to an egg shape as they go out of sight." Within a 3-month period in Wytheville, there had been more than 1,500 sightings. One of the first occurred near Interstate 81, a mile from downtown Wytheville. Eyewitnesses said the craft resembled a brightly lit spinning carousel. Immediately, other sightings were reported. One local resident, Patricia Acker, experienced a total of 10 UFO sightings. "I'm not mistaken about what we saw. Absolutely not, because we'd never seen this before. The best way I can describe them is that they sort of look like a cross between a helicopter and an airplane, but with no noise." Then there was Mary Jane Williamson's sighting, which happened directly above her house in the center of Wytheville. It had all the white lights in front, just a big semicircle of white light, and it was just huge. I mean, it was just absolutely huge. You just had this feeling of something really, really big, just moving, just drifting over your head, and no sounds or anything. 3 months after the initial wave of sightings, Dan received a phone call from a retired military intelligence officer. The officer told him to make sure that he taped the conversation, so he could put the date and everyone to be aware. Dan asked why he wanted to tape the conversation, and the retired officer told him, "I want your friends to know that if something happens to you, that I forewarned you." He told Dan that because of his, the retired officer's, investigations into the UFO field, that they had hit his son and caused his son to die with some kind of virus connected to leukemia. He said that he had information that the federal government was not very happy with his UFO investigations. He said they want to quiet you. Less than 1 month after the phone call, Dan had 2 surprise visitors at his home. The 2 suited men said they were newspaper reporters and stayed for approximately 45 minutes. One of the men interviewed him while the other roamed through the house snapping photographs. Dan said, "They told me when they left they would send me a copy of the article so I could peruse it. And when I didn't get one, I called the newspaper and they said, 'Well, these 2 guys are not on our payroll. They don't work for us.' So who they were, I don't know, but they were in my house, saw my pictures, saw my negatives, talked to my family, took pictures, and then left, but they were not with newspaper." A few weeks later, Dan went to go through his UFO photos. When he got the container out that had the negatives, some were missing. He said, "Now I felt like maybe there was something in those photographs that I was not seeing, so I took the photographs to some other people to look at. We used magnifying glasses and we measured angles trying to find out why these photographs were so important, and we've yet to discover why anyone would want to steal that set of 4 in a series of photographs of UFOs." Dan later said, "If I had my choice, I'd not report the UFO story again. It's just been too hard on my life and created too many problems. Don't look up, because once you look up and you tell somebody what you saw, your life is changed forever." On my trip to Wytheville, I did not see anything unusual in the sky. Unfortunately, there were some clouds the first few nights, and the last night, though clear, did not give me any glimpses of a UFO. Nor did I see Sasquatch. That's going to do it for this episode. As always, you can find Lurk on the major podcast platforms like Spotify, or at lurkpodcast.com, where you can find all the episodes along with our social media links. If you like what you hear, be sure to tell your friends, and if you have a minute, consider giving us a 5-star review. And until next time, keep lurking.